health and well-being are more important for how we think about. Um, we all tend to think about them in terms of healthcare, and healthcare, as important as it is, and we've got some of the world's best healthcare here in the country. It's only, and this is what I'm screaming, healthcare is responsible for less than 15% of positive health outcomes. 15%. That means 85% of positive health outcomes are dependent on things outside of healthcare.
Wow.
So when it comes to, you're talking about, and you might have heard the expression that your zip code is more important to your health outcomes than your genetic code, or to your medical history. It's absolutely true. And that's what this is referring to. So
Welcome, neighbors. Thank you for giving your attention to the Healthier Neighbors Mini Grant podcast, where we are highlighting previous mini grant winners and hearing from their impact on behavioral health and connection to community. Healthier Neighbors is a resident-led, place-based initiative prioritizing the expressed behavioral health needs of the residents of Riviera Beach and northern West Palm Beach. Funded by Palm Health Foundation, we are one of 6 Healthier Together communities who have been serving alongside community for 6+ years. And today, neighbors, we start every show with talking about our funding source, which is very important. And today we have the pleasure of having Mr. Patrick McNamara, licensed clinical social worker and president and CEO of Palm Health Foundation. Welcome, Patrick.
thanks so much, Tim.
And I'm going to go back to my affectionate name of you, Pat, but I just wanted to introduce you by your government name,
Sure.
Patrick McNamara, but we call you Pat.
That's right.
And it's important to me that I started by saying that you're a licensed clinical social worker first, right? And before I get into why that's important for me, I just want to find out from you, Pat, when did you fall in love with health?
It's the first time I've been asked that question, phrased that way. So let me just say I love the question, and it made me think.
Awesome.
And I thought about, okay, did I ever really fall in love with health? Yes, but the words that I would use is I fell in love with living.
Wow.
I fell in love with deciding to live. And life to its fullest. And so if you want me to explain that a little bit.
Absolutely, please.
So I am one of 7 kids from a large Irish Catholic family. I grew up in New Orleans.
Okay.
And my parents were wonderful. We had a great life growing up as kids. My father was a pretty successful defense attorney, and my mom was a stay-at-home mom. And from a pretty idyllic childhood to when I got into my teens, that's when it almost seemed like there was a curse that struck the family. And my siblings started having a lot of serious mental health issues. And this culminated with my older brother, who I was very close to. He's 2 years older than me. I followed in his footsteps to Georgetown University, thought I was the cat's meow, and life was good up until this point of my siblings really starting to struggle. And then my brother took his life his senior year at Georgetown, would have been my sophomore year. So I was 19, he was 21. And that was like just a bomb going off in our family.
I can imagine.
When you kind of follow in somebody's footsteps and then they're gone, that to me was a real wake up call in so many different ways. And let alone, grieving his loss, which took a long time and continues. Actually, it
Continues.
never really ends. But it forced me to reevaluate, the road that I was going down, and since he and I were so alike, really my looking at, I don't want to be going down a road where I'm going to wind up taking my own life, or not enjoying life to its fullest. As horrible as this has been, it made me think, why do I want to live? And to actually choose to live. And what am I going to live for?
Wow.
And so finding purpose through all of that, and seeing that my brother's life and his death would not be in vain, and recognizing our family came out of all of that turmoil, with the exception of losing my brother. Now we're all living happy, healthy, normal lives with families of our own. And we were able to overcome some significant trials.
Absolutely.
But we had resources, and it back at the time, in that period of reflection and thinking about, how awful this was, but now with a renewed purpose and wanting to live and what I'm living for, that's when I decided to change my major. I had been studying government.
I was going to ask you, was there a shift in what you were studying after that experience? And thank you for sharing your story.
Yeah, absolutely. I was on a scholarship at Georgetown in ROTC, where my plan was
Really?
I was going to be a commissioned officer on graduating, give back my 4 years,
Okay.
and I was planning to become a lawyer, just like my dad. And so that, I said, that's no longer my path. I changed my major to psychology, and then I wound up getting my master's in social work. And, with that renewed purpose in life, I realized that my calling and why when I felt most alive was when I saw others thriving, and overcoming challenges, and the ability to do that through social work was very attractive to me. So that's how I wound up falling in love with living, and health really being all about well-being.
Well, as a fellow social worker, I too diverted my path in college for very different reasons. I started off on the physical therapy and ended in social work. And, it's life circumstances that happened while I was in college. They shut down the program nationally, and they said, you have to either go in this direction or you have to start over from scratch. And I was there like, where do I go from here? Like, I just knew I was going to be a physical therapist.
Right.
So when I tell the story of how I got to where I am, it's like, this is not how it started out. So, one of the many things that I recognized about you before I had an opportunity to meet you was the LCSW. And having a BSW, a bachelor's in social work, I always wondered, like, should I do it? Should I go back and get it? Should I finish it? And I just thought it was so phenomenal that someone who was directing a nonprofit organization actually had a background in social work. And I just thought that was so intriguing to me. What was your path? So if someone says, I admire where Pat is. How did you get from ROTC to whatever was next, to coming back to Palm Beach and now being in a CEO role?
Yeah, so it was definitely not a clear path. Many twists and turns.
But that's life.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And so that major turn from what I had been planning, to be a lawyer, to going into social work, that started me off basically in learning from the ground up in terms of providing social work. And I
Mm-hmm.
still, when I introduce myself professionally, I introduce myself as a social worker because it's a lens that once you develop that and your way of seeing the world and your calling, that it's not like you drop that. No matter what position you're in, that's just the
Mm-hmm.
training that you have,
Mm-hmm.
and that continues to be to now. So I was really committed after getting my master's in recognizing. Well, let me just say first off, in graduate school and get my master's, one of the exercises that they did was they said you need to identify somebody who is different from you on at least 4 different sort of ways, axes. One is race,
Mm-hmm.
another was gender, and basically interview them and then write it up on what you learned. And that was a really
Who'd you select?
well, who I selected was she was basically my second mom. She was the
Oh,
lady
wow.
who cleaned our house.
Okay.
And took care of me. My mom, having 7 kids, was always running around, and so Ida was the woman that I grew up with, who basically, aside from my mom, was my other mom,
Mm-hmm.
and I loved her, and I thought I knew about her, but I'd never asked her the questions that I wound up asking her in this
Really?
interview. So really learning more about her and her life. And it just was so eye-opening that this person that I had known for, by that time, I must have been probably 22, 22, 23.
And this wasn't too long after your brother passed.
That's right.
Yeah.
That's right. And she was very close to my brother
Of
too.
course. Mm-hmm.
We used to always joke with her, and we just had a wonderful relationship. She just passed away last year.
I'm sorry about that.
No, that's okay. But going to visit her where she grew up,
Mm-hmm.
that was 3 years ago, and spending time with her family's actually pretty close to our family now. But what I learned from that interview was just because it was a wake up call. Like, I assumed that most people's experience of life was, pretty similar to mine, and because you don't know any different or any better. And then in learning much more about this person that I had known for many years, but never, going into asking her about her life and her life experiences, and growing up in rural Louisiana. For a Black woman and all that she had been through. And she just had a wonderful, almost always happy disposition. And, she taught me a lot. And to take a step back from thinking that my experience, my perspective on things was as informed as I thought it was.
Mm-hmm.
It's like, I had increasingly developed an appreciation for perspective, in terms of, your perspective really tends to color things no matter who you are.
Yeah.
But that was the first time when I began to experience, or understand that people's life experiences and their perspective really informs how they live. And if I'm going to be a good social worker, I need to develop a much greater appreciation and a measure of humility in terms of I don't know nearly as much as I think I do when I'm talking with other people.
It's interesting how you speak about Miss Ida and the perspective that you gain because you saw her in this pleasant mood with you all the time and caring for you and your family and your siblings, that you just figured her life was just as pleasant as yours.
Yeah. That's right. That's exactly right.
And things got revealed in the interview, and it sounds like it opened your eyes up even more to just the realities of the world and people's upbringings and what they experience and the mask that people wear.
For sure. And, the fact that, to varying degrees, we all face adversity.
Mm-hmm.
but it makes a tremendous difference when you're surrounded by people that are supportive and you have access to resources in terms of overcoming that adversity. And, it's more like those who don't have those luxuries or the resources or being surrounded by people who love them. That can be when the odds start getting stacked against you, and where I really, again, my calling has been increasingly looking at reevaluating on a regular basis what I think I know, and further incorporating working with people. And one of the fundamental tenets of social work that always struck a chord with me and continues to is the idea of self-determination. You can't go in and tell somebody this is what you need to do. You need to be able to recognize their agency and what is it that you want to do and need to do in the situation. But I'm going to join with you and help you figure that out. And that continues to be where I think we often miss the boat, where coming up with ways that we think are going to help without properly joining with and working with folks to figure out what's going to be most helpful to get to where they want to go. So
when you talk about working with people, right, and with, I think about working with community. And one of my very first memories of you was with Barbara Cheeves, a fellow friend and colleague and community supporter of ours. And she reached out to me because the organization you were with at the time, Community Partners, was looking for a resident to serve on their board, a resident from Riviera Beach. And I lived in Riviera Beach. Yep. So I went in and met you and we talked, and, you talked to me about my role in community and what Community Partners did. Even though I was familiar, I wasn't as familiar. And I was sitting there like, they're really trying to get people from the community to be on the board. Like, this is really cool. So, in my mind, I'm just thinking, what does Barbara want to get me into now? And she's like, no, I really think this would be a great connect. I really think that you can learn from them and they can learn from you. And then Healthier Neighbors came along. Yep. And then when I saw who the fiscal agent was, I was like, I think this is going to be a conflict of interest. I don't think I can serve on the board and they're my fiscal agent at the same time. But I was still excited to be connected to the organization. And I proudly wear this shirt today. And it's also my Super Bowl jersey because I never know who's playing Super Bowl. So I just wear this. I'm neutral. I'm here for community and the chicken wings and, nice. I'm good. But one of the very first mandatory trainings that Palm Health had for not only staff, but also all of the directors was for us to go to the Racial Equity Institute training. And that was such an eye-opener for me. And why was that so important to Palm Health? That not only staff, but the directors participate in the Racial Equity Institute?
I think it goes to this idea of the assumptions that we make and the need to reevaluate things that we think we know. And especially on issues involving relationships and the history, again, that we think we know. All of those things going into, in our opinion, misguided attempts in the past of coming up with solutions that, might have been predicated on all the best thinking and best intention, but not incorporating folks with lived experience into coming up with the solutions at hand. And prior to my coming over to Palm Health Foundation, I kept hearing these two phrases, and it was like, no matter if I was going to a housing conference, because I was, very big I was big in the housing arena, and going to national conferences, going to a conference on finance. And one of the things we offered at Community Partners is these individual development accounts where you get match savings, and participating in that and repairing your credit and all those sorts of things. So it didn't really matter what sector I was attending a conference for, but this phrase kept coming up, and it was nothing about us without us. And the other way that it was put was, whatever you do for me without me, you do to me. But every time it would be brought up, I would think, even though I'm a social worker and I've had this career path, I remember when I first, made it into a position where I was no longer providing direct services, but more in terms of an administrative role, in management, without even realizing it, because it's just the way that you learn to play the game and the way that to do things, to get things done. I wound up becoming pretty good at designing ways to play the game and designing programs where they did some good. So I'm not going to trash all of it, but they always fell short. And in reality, they were designed without any input from the folks that we were trying to work with or help, and got pretty good at doing things to people. And so that was like, I keep hearing this, and it's like almost like I feel like they're speaking to me, like, you need to reevaluate what you're doing and how you're going convicted about it. I did. And so I started that journey at Community Partners. And actually I saw that Palm, in trying to go down the road of Healthier Together, was in a very, going down a similar path. And where you don't have the answers, but you're willing to walk in faith and work with folks and open up a dialogue, a real honest dialogue. And the centrality of, in our marginalized communities, whatever word you want to tack on to that in terms of communities, where working in community development, we had always focused on how can we help to reinvest in neighborhoods where there's just blight, and where there are these social ills that everybody's wrestling with, and that's where we're going to go in and try to come up with some solutions. And again, those solutions, no matter what the good intentions were, whether it was a matter of working with parents in the area, or working on housing, or working on addressing mental health issues, it was never with a good understanding and privileging of the experience of the folks we were trying to help
in the community.
Yeah. And so that really kind of took me back to, in an individual therapy, I would never do that. I would always start with trying to join with somebody and learning more about them.
Absolutely.
So why are we doing it at a social level in terms of these interventions? And that's when I just started to think about these things. And the more I learned about, that's been our more traditional, conventional way of dealing with race issues and trying to overcome problems that are pretty entrenched. So just seeing where those were always falling short, figured that there's got to be a better way, and kind of taking a leap of faith, and also going through some really good leadership development that was challenging me.
Yeah. Very personal work.
Yeah.
In this work. It's very personal work.
Yeah.
And funny story. I don't know if I've ever told this story in front of you, but I can tell it now because, I've been here for 6+ years. But the first 6 months, talking about lived experience and engagement, and even before the first 6 months of me coming on board, I want to start with my interview for this position. That was very different. And let me back up maybe just a little bit more. The job description requested that the individual live in Riviera Beach or Northern West Palm Beach,
Mm-hmm.
which was the communities that were going to be served.
Mm-hmm.
And that was my first kind of like, I don't know, like what would be right before green, maybe yellowish flag that was like, this might be real. Like they might actually want to do this. And then
Mm-hmm.
going into the interview, I'm used to being in front of a panel of individuals, but these individuals were residents
Mm-hmm.
and they were interviewing me for the position.
Mm-hmm.
And then moving from there, my first 6 months in this position, I remember calling Lauren, who was the director of Healthier Jupiter. And I was like, okay, who can I talk to that's not going to like tell or, and I said, I think I'm going to get fired. And she's like, what are you talking about? You just got here. And I was like, yeah, but all I've been doing is talking with people and getting their information. I'm like, I don't think this is what I'm supposed to do. Like, I'm getting the information, but I'm not spending any money. We're not doing any huge events, and I'm like, is this? And she's like, this is exactly what you're supposed to be doing.
Mm-hmm.
And I said, well, when do I stop? And she said, you'll know. You'll know when it's time for you to stop the conversations. You'll feel it. It will become redundant in community. You'll begin hearing the same things from residents. And that's when you know that they're ready to go.
Mm-hmm.
And that was my first 6 months experience in this position.
Mm-hmm.
And it was going to churches, going to the park, going to homes, community partners meetings with residents, and just finding out from them their lived experience as it related to behavioral health. And I think that whole building trust
Mm-hmm.
with community over time was so important
Mm-hmm.
to the stability of this initiative and the buy-in from
Mm-hmm.
residents, because we understand that so many programs come in and out of community often, and folks get discouraged by getting attached to certain things because it may not be there.
Yeah.
But it's like, no, we're here, and what we're doing is we're trying to strengthen the resources around you as well. So even if this is not here for 20, 30 years, there's a stronger support system, your voice is louder, you feel supported, the resources are here. And for me, that's always been what's attracted me to this initiative, and the transparency
Mm-hmm.
of Palm Health. So if I may take your mic for a minute and give Palm Health your flowers, I've never had a relationship with a funder like this before. Normally, you just speak to funders via email if you know their email address. Normally it's you send things over to your finance department and they send it off to the funders, and you don't really have a connection. But there's a relationship with the Healthier Together communities and Palm Health that is very unique.
Mm-hmm.
It's very intimate, it's very personal, and I think I believe it started when we went to Racial Equity Institute together,
Mm-hmm.
and we did a debrief together. And that debrief of us talking about our personal stories and our lived experiences helped me realize that this was going to be a very different project.
Mm-hmm.
And there's a lot of eyes on Palm Health, right?
Mm-hmm.
There's a lot of eyes on Palm Health for a variety of reasons. And folks are wondering and even asking, how do you just give money to community and trust
Mm-hmm.
that they'll know what to do with that? Like, that's a real question.
Mm-hmm.
And what's your response to that? Even though I'm living in that,
Yeah.
but what's your response to those that are like, and we get it on a smaller scale with mini grants. It's like, you're just going to give the money to people?
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely.
Mm-hmm.
But what is your response, Palm's response to folks that say, how are you doing this? How are you trusting that process?
Yeah. Well, if I can take a step back for a minute, when you mentioned the importance of the Race Equity Institute and the conversations that ensued, from what I understand, and this, was right around the time, right after or right when I came to Palm.
Mm-hmm.
I had been involved in the work at Community Partners, and increasingly, Community Partners is working with Palm as the fiscal agent
Mm-hmm.
on Healthier Neighbors, but also many other kind of topics that we were going back and forth with the staff at Palm about how can we work together, to go deeper in this direction. So a conversation that was started in Healthier Delray around, so the communities decided they wanted to focus on behavioral health and that they wanted to focus on the neighborhood in Delray, historically Black neighborhood in Delray. Well, it didn't take too long after making those decisions that they said, but before we go any further, we need to have a real honest conversation about race and behavioral health, because we're not going to get anywhere unless, and so one of the ways to begin those conversations was through inviting the Race Equity Institute in, which had already been providing trainings primarily through the school district and with some other partners. But when we did that, and then we saw the power that it would unleash, basically in terms of, you guys are willing to have some really difficult conversations and to be honest and just be authentic about, where things are, whether you're white, Black, Hispanic, joining and beginning to wrestle with this stuff that you need to be able to wrestle with if you're actually going to try to make a difference when it comes to something like behavioral health in the set. And so that was another awakening. And I think it's still a matter of, continuing. The more I learn, the more I appreciate for how much I don't know. So going back to your question about this relationship with community and then, our ability to trust and give funds, part of it has been a growing appreciation for the power that community has in fostering these kind of safe to fail ideas. And it's almost like a garden, like you start a garden and some things are going to grow really well, some things not.
I know that all too well.
But approaching it from a standpoint of even asking the community, how do you view, behavioral health? How do you view? We started getting different answers than the prescriptive clinical way of, viewing mental health, which really was more of a focus on mental illness and more of a focus on mental illness in primarily white populations, in terms of what had dominated the way that we've gone about providing better behavioral health services in general. The whole idea of, and with all of this, let me just say, I think that too often in America, this is a broad statement in our country, but we tend to be so individualistic in looking at, what each person is able to do and the power of the individual, which is great, but discount the more collective in the community and the power of community and the need for community. And now there's all kinds of stuff about, government has its place and markets have their place.
Absolutely.
But if you're only looking on those two rails, you wind up squeezing out community unless community is right on there with those other two. Yeah. So it's like, if you're going to have a really strong, vibrant society, it needs to incorporate markets, government, and community. And you can't just take one of the stools away or one of the, legs of the stool away because it winds up falling. So to me, community and from a social work perspective, it's we talk a lot about social capital and the loss of social capital. And that's been pretty pervasive, a lot of stuff written about that just across the country, but in particular, not looking at the power of social capital in communities that are really wanting to come up with solutions and work with maybe markets and government, but without being told by markets and government about how to go about doing it.
It seems like it's a lot of their choice.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
A lot of their choice. So recently, if anyone has received emails from Palm Health or emails from myself, they'll see that Palm Beach County was recently awarded the 2021-2022 Robert Wood Johnson Culture of Health Award.
Mhm.
Congratulations
Thank you.
to all of us. And there's a very familiar voice on the intro of that video of Palm Beach County. But what does the Robert Wood Johnson Culture of Health Award, what does that mean for the community?
I think it's just a wonderful recognition for this way of working. And it's not just Palm. I think that the work that we've been able to do with partners, where there is
Absolutely.
a much greater willingness to acknowledge the need to not only engage but be authentic and champion folks from the community who don't need to be necessarily professionals to be able to contribute for a healthier community. And our partners at Children's Services Council, our partners at the county, actually within community services and within the youth services department, they were the co-applicants on the application, and other funders, really beginning to look at there's something there.
Yeah.
And to me, I think we're at an inflection point, and I hope we're able to take this Culture of Health Prize and further embed this way of working. And it doesn't have to be an either or thing. It's not like you do all the work this way or all the work the more traditional way. I think that there is room for opening up. We have to continue to do a lot of the traditional stuff. It's necessary, but opening up even just a good, sustainable window of being able to invite community in and be truly more strengths-based as opposed to deficits-based. And the idea of doing community needs assessments, that might work for certain institutions, but it doesn't work for this way of working where, it's like the old adage that if all you have is a hammer, then everything turns into a nail. It's like if all you're doing is using community needs assessments and you're only going to see the needs, and you only develop inadvertently a greater dependency on how you're going to meet those needs. And without properly also acknowledging the strengths that already exist, and how do you build on those strengths at the same time? It needs to be a both and as opposed to an either or.
I definitely think that has been one of the major accomplishments of the mini grant process. And it's identifying all of these assets. So it's like you think you know what's going on in community, and then I'll read an application. I'm like, this person is here. You're doing this here. This is happening here. And when you talk about the combination of the newer models and tradition, I appreciate the honesty in conversation, because it takes a certain level of honesty for us to look at traditional happenings in nonprofits and for-profits and businesses to say, that part right there is not working. This part's working, but that part's not working. We don't need to throw the whole thing away,
Right.
but let's be intentional about what is working and how community is responding to that.
Yep.
And what I love most is when we go to community and working with them, and we're going back to, present to them what they've said, especially, and I'll give the example of the behavioral health conversation in Riviera Beach in Northern West Palm. When we were starting out, the conversation was very different than what I was expecting, because I was expecting mental health responses. And then people started bringing up, and residents started saying, well, my sidewalk isn't paved and I don't have trees on my street. How can I go for a walk? Or, I'm not as capable to move around my home anymore because of these limitations that are, limiting my behavioral health. And then someone brought up access to employment. and employment training in my community would help increase my behavioral health outcomes. And the conversation just started to shift, and it made me realize, I'll speak for myself, that what I went in there expecting was not what community thought. And it was so important for me to listen. But it was also important that Palm dedicated that time to us to say, it's okay to listen.
Yep.
We're not expecting anything else from you but to listen. And when you find out what the people said, ask them, did you get it right?
Yep.
So we would go back and say, this is what we heard at the last community meeting. Did we hear it right? And sometimes I would hear, nope, that's not what I said, because we would put verbatim what people said, up on the big screen, and someone would say, that's not what I said. This is what I meant. And we would correct it in real time. And that for me was the community understanding that they were the leaders. I was the scribe, and I was the person to bring information back to the funders and say, this is how they want to spend the money.
Yep.
And this is what, and that is a huge shift for organizations and for boards and for supporters. And how do you feel now as we're moving into this? For some of us, we're in our 6th, 7th year. How do you feel that direction from community has brought us to where we are today?
And it's been essential. It's been an absolutely essential ingredient. And one of the things that, as the Healthier Together initiative evolves, because it has been around for that many years, that is something that we're committed to preserving. And what we talk about is this idea of the Healthier Together communities, the 6 communities, evolving into this culture of health network. And, we've fleshed out more in the past, actually 2 months, in our own planning and getting input from various folks, including residents, of course. How do you preserve those elements that are working and continue to lean in and be more intentional along the lines of what you've found working, and shed the stuff that's not? And that's where we are now. And that's going to entail ongoing dialogue and ways of doing that. And another word for it is sense making. And so when you are regularly doing sense making with the community, which is one of the things that Healthier Together did before we started using the more sophisticated instruments of sense maker itself, we've always been involved in this process of sense making. And so all sense making is making sense of the world so that you can act in it. And it's making sense of the world with as many diverse perspectives as possible, because if you start off only with your own perspective, and you're only going to wind up with your own solutions. But if you do it in a more collective way that is intentional, and where you're making sense of the world that folks live in, and then how to act in it purposefully together, that's something that I think that we've continued to get better and better at. It's like a muscle that we've been developing. But it's never going to be the type of thing that's like a silver bullet for this is the answer.
Right.
It's more a matter of the process of continuing to do that. And that's where you build trust, because if the community sees that you are regularly coming back to this dialogue, it's not a one and done. It's an ongoing conversation. Are we continuing to move in the right direction or not?
Absolutely. And that the conversation is evolving as well, that we're not always having the same conversation with community. And so, blanket question, right? But many people may be wondering it. So if an organization is contemplating moving in this direction of resident-led initiative, or it being more inclusive of residents in their decision-making process, especially as it relates to programs and projects, what would you say would be a good just starting point for them?
Well, what we're trying to do with the Culture of Health Prize money, because it not only the bragging rights nationally,
Right.
and the nice spotlight being shown on Palm Beach County across the country over this year, but also the funding. We got awarded $25,000, which in the grand scheme of things is there's not a lot you can do with $25,000. But
Someone's watching this and saying, "What? I can do a lot with 25,000."
No,
but we're looking at the county.
It's relative.
Here.
Yeah,
Yes.
exactly. And $25,000 from a funder's perspective, annually, our annual budget is about $5 million. So 25,000 within that $5 million thought.
Mm-hmm.
That's where it's not to discount it, but it's like we want to leverage that.
Absolutely.
And so what we've done, and I'm really happy with the response from our partnering funders, especially those who've been wanting to lean in to equity work. They have agreed to match the 25,000. Palm stepped up to match it with 25. Children's Services Council has, United Way of Palm Beach County just approved it. Quantum Foundation just approved to match it as well. Hoping that the Community Foundation will. And we're designing this where the goal is to have close to $150,000 to work with in an intentional asset-based community development approach that is more like a learning lab for funders. So we're in the process of designing that right now with Nikki Martin, who is a friend.
Awesome.
And Nikki is really steeped in asset-based community development and is a Robert Wood Johnson Fellow right now. And so we've begun talking with her about what is that going to look like. And so this idea of inviting in the other funders and we told them that part of the purpose of it, because they ask the same questions as is typical, like, okay, so what's the logic model, the outcomes, and the other kind of stuff. We said, this is purposefully different. So we're asking you to suspend, what you would typically ask for. It's not a whole lot of your budget. We're asking you to kind of take it on faith, but to look at in terms of the return that you would be getting more from a learning standpoint. And it's going to entail some self-reflection. And we're not asking you to convert all of what you do into work in this way, but we are asking you to join with us, not to say that we've found the answer, but that we've learned a lot and you guys have come to value that. And how can we learn together to do this work, preserve doing this kind of work in Palm Beach County and continue to reap the benefit annually, as opposed to, again, it's nice to have the recognition once, but how do we maintain the work so that we would win every year if
Absolutely,
that were the sort of...
And to see the expansion of that work with additional partners.
Exactly.
I'm really excited about that. Were you saying something else?
I was just going to say that the idea of asset-based community development is all about looking at what are the strengths that already exist in the community.
Absolutely.
And how are you working with those? And it's intentionally different from a deficit-based model, which is... where you start off with needs assessments and that sort of thing. So it's not saying that again, I just want to emphasize it's not one or the other. Mm-hmm. It's a both and that we're saying. And asset-based community development is not a new idea to this community. We brought in some of the best in the past 2 decades to talk about it. But I don't think the funding community was ready to embrace what it takes in order to be able to do that, which is more of now it's actually becoming a major trend in philanthropy.
A trend,
People refer to it as trust-based philanthropy. And to me, that's a term for what we've been practicing through Healthier Together in many ways. And this is another way to begin to practice more trust-based philanthropy through this sort of learning lab about asset-based community development.
I'm excited about this venture because I'm hearing and I'm feeling and I'm seeing the emails and the invitations to let's be a part of this conversation. How do we have true resident engagement? What does that look like? And it really, really excites me that so many more organizations, providers are looking at what can we shift if we can't go all the way, to do exactly what you did, which no one should do exactly what we did, because I always say that it's based on community. All communities are not a monolith. We can't take what's happening here in Healthier Neighbors and move it to Healthier Delray and think it's going to have the same exact impact,
Right.
because it's based on the strengths in this community.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm gonna skip all the way, right? Because we talk a lot about your days. Because all this conversation we're having, right? These are meetings, these are after hours, these are before hours,
Mm-hmm.
these are, what kind of consumes you.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the many things I love about Palm, every now and then a surprise will just pop up in my email. And the last one I got was, treat yourself to one of these 5 things on Palm Health. And the item that I chose was a massage. And I was like, what? Yes. Thank you so much. I really, really appreciate that. So how does Pat take care of himself?
I do pretty well in that area.
Awesome. I'm so glad to hear that, because some people
I'm
they
not
go
hurting
straight
in the self-care arena.
Okay.
Just as an example.
What do some of those rituals, because it seems like they're rituals, what do some of those rituals entail?
I do try to practice what we preach, especially when it comes to exercise. I learned, actually, this is going back to the days of my brother and early on, one of the best things I could do for my own mental health was to exercise.
And you're a runner, right?
I was, but now that I've been getting older and fatter, I go to the gym, and I still like to eat, and I'm not going to take away from any of those things. But I've actually have more muscle mass, so doing more weights and that kind of stuff, along with abdominal things, whole body exercises, and then the cardio stuff. And I usually do that on the elliptical machine.
That was very common during the pandemic, and we were having weekly meetings on Zoom, and it was not foreign for either you or Kenya or someone else to be on a walk.
Absolutely.
And I was like, why not? We're home, walking, and Pat's talking, and I was like, get it, Pat. He's walking. I was like, oh, I'm sitting on the couch. Okay, I could do something different.
I tell you, and I do some of my best thinking when I'm walking, just alone. And typically, if I'm not walking in silence, I'm listening to a book. And I'm a voracious reader. For self-care, for me, it's exercise, learning. I love learning. And it's one of those things where I'm regularly feeding my brain. And not that I have to, it's actually a continuing source of enjoyment. And my family. And, we're now empty nesters. And so my son, he's my oldest. He's now a lawyer. Up in Tallahassee. He works in the appellate court up there.
Awesome.
But for his birthday, we just went for a fishing trip over in Crystal River, Florida, and caught our limit on trout. And
that was relaxing.
I fish as much as I can.
That's awesome.
Yeah, exactly.
That's awesome. So fishing and taking care of yourself and self-care, all great habits. And what does the community have to look forward to from Palm Health? I know that I'm privileged to be a part of a lot of conversations that are happening about the future of health in Palm Beach County. And it's really exciting. It's really exciting, the conversations that are going on between American Heart Association, Health Council of Southeast Florida, Palm Health, just so many great partners together. So what does community have to look forward to?
So our 3 focus areas, all of the Healthier Together work has been under this idea of building a culture of health. So we're committed to continuing to build a culture of health here in Palm Beach County. And what that looks like in terms of the evolution of the Healthier Together initiative as it first started to where it continues, it's the continuation of the initiative. It's basically from all the input, feedback, and lessons learned over the years, how do we do more of what really seems to work? And that definitely is the ongoing sense making and working with the community and privileging the community voice and the nothing about us without us kind of approach, asset-based development. So that's going to continue, but these focus areas are not all in a silo. They kind of go into the other areas too. So the other two areas are advancing brain health,
Mm-hmm.
and then strengthening the health professions. And advancing brain health, you're aware of this. 4 of the 6 communities in Healthier Together chose to focus on behavioral health. The communities chose to focus on behavioral health, and doing behavioral health better and for more people is something we continue to be committed to. But we also have these amazing new assets in Palm Beach County that I'm one of the biggest champions, cheerleaders to let everybody know about, because we've only begun to reap the benefits, and it's going to be a lot more coming. So the folks have heard the names, but I don't think most people have gotten familiar with what they are, what they do. But Scripps Research Institute
Mm-hmm.
and Max Planck Neuroscience Institute are 2 of the world's most advanced, innovative brain science organizations, and they're located here in Palm Beach County. Florida Atlantic University opened their Institute for the Brain.
Yes, and we've taken a few field trips.
Yes, and they now have a new building that's going up right across from Max Planck. It's a 55,000 square foot building for the Brain Institute. And the research and the caliber of folks that they have involved with the Institute are top notch. And so for me as a social worker, and having an interest in knowing that, the brain is the least understood organ in the body and probably the most important to understand better about what's going on. It's terribly exciting to be partners with those 3 and really see Palm Beach County has all the potential to be a major hub for advancing brain health globally.
Yeah.
And so what that then means for the community and the bidirectional communication with the community with those kinds of assets, and particularly with the Brain Institute at FAU, what the others did not have, but FAU does have, is the connection with an academic institution and reaching our younger students and creating a pipeline basically from middle school and high school into these college tracks, and retaining some really bright talent here, and the jobs that'll create that comes along with it. There's a really I have a very optimistic view of the benefits that we have yet to reap from that relationship. So, including like with behavioral health, many of those really bright scientists and the folks who work at the Brain Institute and the other places, I've come to learn, have gotten involved in their careers mainly out of having a family member or somebody else who was dealing with mental illness. And so
very common.
They're in their own search basically for what they contribute to it. And it's not just going to stay in the lab or in the academic arena. They are already very involved in the community, and I'm looking to draw them in even further in working with us to be innovative in behavioral health and care. And that's not just for treating mental illness, but the idea of mental wellness and how do you promote health and well-being. And so much of that is related to what you can do for taking care of your brain. And so I get really excited about the future of all that stuff. And it incorporates the work with the community. It's not, again, just like some sort of ivory tower.
It doesn't feel that way. And I would say what connected me to brain health was when I was asked to speak at the luncheon, and I was said, "You want me to speak at a brain health luncheon?" And yes, we want healthier neighbors to be present and to talk about the work that's being done. And I remember standing up there, and the title of what I was talking about was "Today Was a Good Day,"
Mhm.
and just talking about what in our community is a good day in comparison to what others may think is a bad day,
Mhm.
but no, this was a pretty good day. And anyone who's familiar with the song, from Ice Cube knows, like, if you're looking at the video, it's like, that was a good day. But when you're from there, that was a good day, and
Mhm.
how that meant to you and how that impacted you and your family. And what I'm really excited about is the intentionality behind the language that we're using to be more inclusive of community,
Mhm.
so that everyone understands that what is being invested in is benefiting all of us.
Yep,
And it's
exactly.
not that, well, I don't have a brain health issue, why do I need to go there? It's like, there's so many things that affect our brain health.
Mhm.
And I'm so excited about these conversations. And I know that there will be folks who want to stay connected to Palm Health's initiatives,
Mhm.
may want to be a part of those initiatives, because it's always inclusive of individuals who want to work on them, whether it's brain health or um, uh, s- uh, let's move.
Mhm.
Trying to think of what's going on right now.
Right.
But where can folks find Palm Health,
Mhm.
and how can they get connected to any of the initiatives they might be interested in? So if you want to tell the folks right here where
Sure.
they can do that.
So our website is going to be the best place to do that, and that's at palmhealthfoundation.org. But also in social media, if you want to look us up on Facebook, look us up on Twitter, Instagram. We have a presence on all the major social media outlets. And so you can just search for Palm Health Foundation on any one of those three. But palmhealthfoundation.org is going to be your best bet.
And social media platforms are all very active and up to date. So, last question for you, and the question that I ask everyone is, what are you screaming? What do you want everyone to hear?
Hmm. Well, aside from nothing about us without us, um, I would say the other thing that I'm screaming, um, you know, you, health and well-being are more important for how we think about. Um, we all tend to think about them in terms of healthcare, and healthcare, as important as it is, and we've got some of the best, some of the world's best healthcare here in the country. It's only, and this is what I'm screaming: healthcare is responsible for less than 15% of positive health outcomes. 15%. That means 85% of positive health outcomes are dependent on things outside of healthcare.
Wow.
So when it comes to, you're talking about, and you might have heard the expression that your zip code is more important to your health outcomes than your genetic code, or to your medical history. It's absolutely true. And that's what this is referring to. So as far as the all those other things that go into it, as healthy behaviors, lifestyle, but also your environment, and the conditions around you, and socioeconomic conditions, all of those things factor into your health outcomes. And so the more we can shine a light on the agency that each of us has, and even better collectively that we have in terms of shaping those things that are not in the healthcare arena, where we tend to put all the investment and
Yeah.
attention and focus, but
Hmm.
all of these other areas that we have greater control over, and that we can do better if we pay more attention to it and have more dialogue and focus on what's working, and what we can do better. That's where I think we can begin to turn the tide on some of the most stubborn problems that we've been facing.
Well, all I have to say is let's go.
Let's go.
Let's go. Thank you, neighbors, for being here with us, for getting to know Pat a little bit better. Pat is just essential for, if you've never worked with him, he sends the best articles, prints up to dates, but it's really, as you said, you love learning. And for those who are connected to you, we understand that you do love learning, and we thank you for being intentional about going that extra mile to learn, to know, to explore outside of what you say was your norm, so that that can help improve the culture of health for Palm Beach County. So that is what we have for you, neighbors, today. And please continue to follow Healthier Neighbors on our social media outlets, and feel free to reach out to us with any comments or questions that you have. Thank you so much. Enjoy your time.